You're listening to the Scaling Culture Podcast, where we sit down with thought leaders who share their experiences building incredible workplace cultures. Our guest today is Patty Huska, Chief People Officer for American Express Global Business Travel. She leads the company's human resources function, supporting over 13,500 people globally. Patty is a strong advocate of diversity and inclusion, is on the strategic advisory board of WINIT and GBTA, and has been recognized in the top 40 women in travel. In this episode of Scaling Culture, Ron and Patty discuss AmEx's Blue Box values and Patty's personal culture aha moment when 9/11 happened, how it deeply affected their company culture to this day, 20 years later, how to integrate and align companies' cultures when going through an acquisition, and AmEx experience through the pandemic, virtual workplaces, and employee engagement strategies. As they acquire other companies, they face that culture challenge of absorbing an existing culture into their own. And Ron and Patty discuss that unique challenge as well in a global organization.
Welcome to another episode of the Scaling Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Ron Lovett, and today I'm extremely excited to have Patty Huska with us, who's the Chief People Officer at AmEx Global Business Travel. Patty, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And I was so excited as we talked about that you're located in Boston. Boston, I just miss Boston. I go every year with my wife. We go see the Christmas tree that we donate from Halifax to Boston. There's a lot of history there.
That's right. I'm going to open up those borders and keep coming down.
That's right. I read my daughter the Boston, the Halifax explosion book, which talks about how Boston helped Halifax during that time and the donation of the massive Christmas tree. Do you know that story?
I do. Yeah, and it's beautiful. And that's going to the tree will go up right around Thanksgiving. That's
right. Yeah. When is the U.S. Thanksgiving?
It is the 24th, I believe, this year.
November. Right. November. We just had ours.
I know. Happy belated.
And I will say, rookie move. I did not, for all those listening for the U.S. Thanksgiving, I forgot to take my turkey. I put it from the freezer to the fridge the night before. Rookie move. It should have been in the sink. It was not thawed for cooking absolutely. Time. Rookie move. So let's move on. Let's get into it. So Patty, I was pumped when I saw your name and AmEx. I mean, I'm just a huge AmEx fan, and so I was excited to get the chance to speak to you. So let's talk about, let's give us a quick overview. We've done the intro, but quick overview of Patty and your journey as to, and your journey getting you to today in your current role as Chief People Officer.
Sure. And again, I'm delighted to be here. I've had a phenomenal career at AmEx and AmEx GBT. I was, as I said, born, raised, I've always been in Boston. When I got out of school, I had a minor in human resources and I was working for a headhunting firm. And I was fortunate enough to be hired as a recruiter at Thomas Cook, which was a travel company based out of Cambridge, Mass. Long story short, they were acquired by AmEx about 3 months into me being there. And I was fortunate enough to work on the integration. And I just stayed with the company and had a number of positions where I was commuting back and forth to New York. So I worked in whether it was recruitment, compensation, employee relations. I had a benefit of working across multiple areas. Was fortunate to be able to stay in Boston. I was virtual, which was great once we started having children. And then about 6 years ago, the travel division spun off into a joint venture, which is still 50% owned by American Express, 50% venture capital. And then I became the Chief People Officer of that organization. So it's been a great ride, a number of acquisitions and all around the time, along the line, and just some phenomenal experiences.
I can imagine. And so you really started kind of school ground level and then really moved, throughout your career. That's really exciting. Obviously, it spoke to you and something you leaned into. But I'm curious. I'm going to make the assumption that when you started, like, culture wasn't maybe on your radar. When did culture become like, wow, this is something to lean into? This is something to think more strategically about? Was there a moment for you during that journey?
Yeah, so I would say that there's a couple of things. Like if I think of when Thomas Cook, which was also a fantastic company, was more about a 4,400 person organization based out of Cambridge. Folks were very passionate about customers and all, but so there was a lot of connection on that. But when I joined American Express, I was so taken by the fact that we really do live what we call the blue box values. And so much was about being good in your community, giving back, integrity, things of that sort. So that was.
And sorry, Pat, what is blue box values? Is that a term?
So that's what they called it. So the values of the company, and similar now, like we have, and I can talk about the evolution of that. But AmEx had their values that were around like being a good citizen, having integrity, things of that sort. But you really saw that the company put a premium on that. So, for example, if you thought about things like performance management at the end of the year, we focused as much on not just your results, but how you got to your results. So ratings on delivery of results and leadership. So that was something that I think that I was really interested in. But I would say the thing that was a big kind of aha moment for me around culture and people, if I reflect back on 9/11, which was such an incredibly challenging time, being in Boston and in the travel business, we had, unfortunately, a number of employees that were impacted by 9/11 and quite a few customers as well. And that was incredibly painful and tragic. But what hit me then, and I was much earlier in my career, but you realize then just the importance of people. So like the amount of compassion that was demonstrated, the way people cared for each other, our customers saw like really how much people cared about them. So I could give you an example of, we had travel counselors who went out of their way and had cell phones or numbers to find if you were a customer at XYZ company and you happened to be in LA, they hooked you up with somebody who was maybe in San Diego, and you'd rent a car and try to get back across the country. I mean, it was unbelievable, unbelievable the sheer will to get people back home to their loved ones. And to me, like there was a lot about lasting relationships, but there was a big like aha moment for me around the importance and value of leadership, really servant leadership, showing like personal connections to people, and just the importance of when you're being in a leadership position. And at that point, it was more like, looking towards the more senior leaders in the organization, but the fact that like leaders need to define reality, give hope, you get through a situation like that. And that has actually really stayed with me throughout my career in other times when there have been challenges. But I saw this like level of connection and engagement from employees that, although it was a very tragic situation, I think it's something I've carried through my career and really made me realize how important culture in the organization was.
So it sounds like you were introduced to the blue box values, and at that point it was like, okay, this is what the company does. Interesting. But 9/11 sounds like as I was listening, an aha moment for you to say, wow, these people showed up. Like these values actually came through in behaviors. Wow, this is impactful. Am I getting that right?
Yes. And it was not only, and what I've also learned through my career, through ups and downs and pandemics and everything else that's happened, it's not only about showing up on that day of that event, but it's showing up for the long haul, right? So people look and people see how you treat people. We went, and back at that time, and there's been other dips and all in the economy for if you've had to even go through reductions in force or whatnot, like people look to see how do you treat people. And I've learned like just a lot about the importance of that. But again, it's the showing up, but being consistent, and consistency over the long haul was just incredibly important. And so please go on.
I was just saying, but that moment feels like it was obviously tragic, but inspiring for you. And so it kind of gave you this kind of like, wow, I'm all in. Is that right?
Yeah. And the whole thing in terms of pride. And so pride in the organization, pride in the leaders. And that's something that I don't take lightly. And I'm incredibly blessed to be in the role that I'm in now on the senior executive team, but I take it really seriously that people look in terms of your actions, they look in terms of your words, and you do need to kind of set that example. And but there's also something about leadership happens at all levels of the organization. So when I look at not just 9/11, but then other things that have happened, the impact that a frontline employee, so whether that was a travel counselor or somebody getting somebody home, was frankly as important as the actions of people who were running at the time a 80,000 person organization, if you will. So we can all like make such an impact on people and what we do, regardless of the role that you're in an organization. And I think that is something that's really has stuck with me. And for me, I mean, it's why I've been with the company, oh my goodness, now like what, 25 years. So I guess I like it, but it says something just about when people feel that they can bring their best self to work and contribute, it becomes it's not just a job, but it really does become, I would call it like part of your family. And for me also, I think that I've been really privileged when I look back on all those kind of life moments of being an adult, whether it's getting engaged, married, good times, bad times. I've had that like extended colleague experience has just been phenomenal.
Well, I was curious because, my experience with AmEx has always been good, from anyone I've talked to on the phone to a frontline agent or worker. It reminds me in ways to, when you go into a Starbucks versus an ABC coffee house, there's just something different about the interactions. And so I was curious, is there something you guys do broadly from an interview standpoint and onboarding that might be different that ensures that type of alignment, or is it just happens to be you have great people?
I think that's actually a great question. And it's something that we continue to refine. So I believe when you're hiring, so it's not just about capabilities, but you do need to hire for fit. So in leadership positions, how do people handle difficult situations? What's their commitment for developing people at the individual contributor level? I look very much for like intellectual curiosity. Do people want to grow and develop? Like you can really, back in the day, we would do much more of like the formal competency-based interviews. You don't necessarily have that as much now. I mean, in some roles you would, but there is something about really hiring people that you think would be a cultural fit. And I think where that's important is in your branding, how you position the company to make sure that people are clear on kind of what's your North Star, what's your vision, what does it mean to be a colleague in that organization. In fact, it's little things like we're very deliberate now that we talk about colleagues versus employees. So like, how do you, because it just kind of, the language matters.
Yeah. Interesting. But you talked about transitioning and acquisitions, but that's got to get messy, right? So if you take a company that you've acquired that has their own blue box values, their own culture, what's AmEx's strategy when it comes to acquisitions and in aligning culture?
Yeah, that's a really interesting and timely question. I've been through, so not only was acquired, but having been through probably 7 or 8 acquisitions that have led over my career. To me, I think that it's important in the beginning. You need to listen. And for me, like culture and bringing 2 organizations together, it can't just be the words on a page of now we're X organization. But I go back to, again, understanding like what's your North Star, what do you want the new organization to be, and then really investing to understand from both companies, what are the real points of pride, what are the norms, what is the language. So I see, we're in the process of closing an acquisition that we announced earlier in the year with Agencia, that is just a leader in the tech space for corporate travel. They're a division of Expedia, and it's incredibly important that we understand what are their norms, what are their points of pride, taking the time to listen and figure out what is it that you want to be. And we're kind of in the beginning of that journey. But if I think about probably about 4 years ago now, 4 years ago, we acquired an organization called HRG, and they were a travel organization that was based out of the UK. And we spent a great deal of time on understanding culture and our norms and developed what was the joint culture going to be going forward. And again, you can't just send that out on the PowerPoint. You need to understand from the frontline employees, the leaders, what's the direction you're going to go into. And we established these three, we've put everything across three pillars that when we think about AmEx GBT, it's all about people, passion, progress. Easy to remember, and to really have very clearly stated your mantra around how do we invest in our people. It goes back to your recruitment question in terms of, are we passionate about our customers? Are you passionate about your colleagues? And then on the progress front, like what are we doing in terms of innovation, et cetera? So I think those things are important when you're going through a transformation like that.
So it sounds like at that point, you guys looked internally, externally, and said, we need to create a new set of values. So even AmEx kind of pivoted.
So yes. So when we separate, so if you think about, so for AmEx GBT, when we were wholly owned by American Express, right? So we shifted, still 50% owned by AmEx, but we're our own entity. You were basically taking a 150-year-old organization and taking at the time 14,000 people. It feels like it was a lifetime ago. How many? Picking that up, plopping it, and creating a startup environment. So that was wild, wow. Right? So you take literally, so you take an entire division of a company and set up new HR systems, new technology, new processes. But at the same token, so you wanted to have this entrepreneurial startup mentality, but also ensuring that everything we do is still rooted in the values and the integrity from American Express and that rich heritage.
So is that a process that you would continue to go through in an acquisition? Like you kind of always go back and dust off the values and say, okay.
Yes, I think so. And I think you need to set really clear measurements. So we do colleague engagement surveys, and we're very clear. We're very specific. We don't ask, pages upon pages of questions. It's usually a max of probably 15 to 30 questions if it's a pulse or a full survey, but are very specific in terms of whether or not you're clear on the purpose and mission of the company. Do you feel like you have an opportunity to succeed? We ask them just like very pointed questions. And you continue to check in on that. And I think organizations evolve as well. So making sure that you're dusting off what's the strategy, what's the short-term plan, what's the long-term plan. And I think the way that whether you're going through an acquisition or if you're a company that's not going through that degree of change, it's incumbent upon, I think, the leaders and to be really successful to ensure, regardless, again, of what your role is in the company, that you can look at the company's strategy and purpose and know, here's how I play in that. Here's like how I can make a difference. Mm-hmm. And that's just something we spend a lot of time on. And I do think that that's something that you need to continue to refresh and go back on.
Yeah, I feel like this has evolved over time for AmEx, right? And so what are some of the key roadblocks you've seen or things that you're like, wow, we tried it that way and really had to adjust? Was there one or two things, big lessons along the way? You talked about really listening. What else that you're like, wow, we now need to implement this. We learned from the last deal.
Yeah. So if I think about roadblock, I don't know if I can shift a bit. So roadblocks, probably lessons learned in terms of also kind of
please.
As well too, is never say nothing's going to change, right? So you need to be so deliberate in the wording, because I can tell you things do change. I can think of through my career when I was supporting the corporate card division, we had acquired a financial services organization and made the statement to the employees that we value you all, but there will be no reductions in force. This isn't about efficiencies, et cetera, et cetera. And then a financial crisis hit. So that had nothing to do with the acquisition, but in the end of the day, there were some tough decisions that needed to be made. But people remember, as they should, and will say, you stood up on that stage and you said, right? And then it's hard to say, well, yeah, but that changed. So you need to be very careful in terms of the words. So I think that's important. I think the other thing that can be roadblocks is there's a fine balance between saying we want to take the best of both and understand what's really important to you and your organization. But sometimes there are things that just fundamentally have to change. So in our case, for example, we abide by bank holding rules. So whether you like it or not, there's a certain level of compliance and security that we abide by. But so there's some of those things that sometimes can take like a little bit of an adjustment for people. So I think you also need to be very clear on like kind of what the negotiables and what the non-negotiables are.
Because there's going to be lines in the sand. There's going to be values that you're
Absolutely.
not going to move away from, right?
Absolutely.
Whether it's compliance or deep rooted in behaviors.
And to me, again, that goes back to leadership as well, too, of being really comfortable in your own skin, too, that I think we all owe it to like our colleagues to be really direct. And that's the whole piece around, I could still go back to like define reality, give hope, but also give like sort of the explanation on why things sort of are the way that they are. And I think the only other thing I would say, like in terms of what roadblocks or could be challenges is, we're a global organization. I have people in just about every major market around the world. The way you communicate in the US is very different than the way you communicate in Singapore or Sweden or France. And so it's making sure that you adjust. You need to have your overall core global messages, but I've learned along the way, you can't be too controlling. You also need to empower senior leaders in particular countries or markets to then adjust those messages, keep to the core message, but use the language that fits based on culture.
Right. Don't use the script. Be authentic.
Exactly.
The headline's the headline, but say
the
the
Boston
messages
version
you
of
have
the
to deliver.
story. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
It isn't going to work everywhere.
But that's an interesting point, because I think some people even take that communication piece for granted versus saying, hey, let's be clear. We want to get this message out, but you own the message, right?
You own the message. And you also, I think, need to ensure that sometimes we do a great job of managing messages at more senior levels of the organization. But in the end of the day, the person who touches the customer is typically the frontline employee. You need to make sure that like are those messages resonating, and you have like appropriate mechanisms in place to get feedback, because that's something that we have found. We actually just introduced something called the GBTI. It's our entrepreneurs, and we had colleagues from around the world apply to be part of this like think tank to help direct the strategy of the executive team. And then they put videos. It was amazing. We had in the end of the day, it was 2 levels. When we got to the final part, there was 150 people put these amazing videos about their stories and why they're passionate. And it's a mix of people globally. It's a group of about 12. And they're literally, before we roll out the next version of our growth strategy, they're opining on that. They're giving us feedback on it. It's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. I mean, we joke with my boss, the CEO, who's looking around the room saying, I think I have my succession plan, folks. But that's the power of, you have to go to the folks who touch the customer to really get the feedback on kind of the real deal of how things work.
I think some people forget that that's also part of the change management process and buy-in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as we have looked at, even in the pandemic, we've stayed very focused on the mantra of build back better, and looking at how do you set up the organization for the future in terms of taking out complexity, empowering people. Now, there's certainly a cost element to that as well, that when you simplify and make sure that we're having resources focused on very value-added, customer-focused activities versus more around administrative compliance. I mean, there's compliance that we need to do, but the more that you can empower your colleagues and push decision-making down to the most common denominator, it's amazing how much you can unleash potential.
It's funny. I had this, and I think that, as I reflected on the word autonomy, I'm going back to a conversation I had with a coworker where we were really misaligned. I feel like autonomy, I should have done a better job in explaining what I believe autonomy was. And when I think of autonomy, because empowerment to me is autonomy.
Yeah.
But I think some people look at it, autonomy as free for all, and it's not. In my opinion, and from my experience, autonomy is, our company certainly has great systems, processes, tools, resources, support, checks, and balances. But autonomy for me is more about, you're not going to systemize everything. And you want someone to have the autonomy to make a decision for a situation they haven't run across before. Autonomy means be innovative, be creative, speak up, have the autonomy to have your voice. Is that how you see it? And is that how AmEx views autonomy?
Yes. So when I think of autonomy, probably four things come to mind. It's about, I think when people, sometimes folks will say they want autonomy, but I don't know if they actually do, because you need to own your decisions. You need to be accountable. I think you have to have great follow through and good decision making. But there's also a piece that, and I've been incredibly fortunate. I have a very strong team. I do give them a lot of autonomy, particularly in the areas of HR technology and things that I'm not particularly strong in. So I know that for the gentleman who runs that for me, he does make good decisions. But then if there's an issue, there's a thing too, but when you give people like autonomy, that they also know when you want the bad news to travel is even faster than the good news. So meaning if there's an issue, to know like when you escalate things. But if you have a team of people who are accountable, they own their decisions, they have great followership, they know or follow through, and they know when to raise an issue, you can give them autonomy all day long. And it's amazing, again, how much I think you can unleash the potential of an organization.
Yeah, I agree. And, one of the key strategies we implemented, and, I have a book that was released in 2018, Outrageous Empowerment, and the subtitle is, The Incredible Story of Giving Employees Their Brains Back. And that was through autonomy, but we tried to systemize it. And through that, Patricia, what we did is we told everybody, if you're going to do something, ask yourself if it's something you haven't dealt with on a day-to-day basis, ask yourself these three simple questions. Is what you're about to do the right thing for the customer? Is it the right thing for our business based on our values and our purpose? And are you willing to be accountable for your decision? And that was a very helpful process. Mm. What do you think about a process like that? And does AmEx have a similar kind of, here's a guideline for making decisions?
I like that. I like that a lot. Actually, I'm going to steal that. But what we've gotten a bit away from, and you're actually giving me some great ideas here. Years ago, we were very focused on principle-based decision-making models and putting out some of those key questions. I think that's great, because as much as you can encourage folks to kind of step back and ask yourself some questions around alignment, you can also say, because, if I think of myself earlier in my career, like I would have, if somebody asked me to go off and then say, cut off your arm, I'd cut off the arm, but I'd forget to ask if it was the right or the left, like which one did they need?
Right.
So you do need to sometimes step back and create that time of thinking. But yeah, I love that.
Well, it's funny. There was two things that we found from that and continue to find, one was, it was a pre-coaching conversation, because you'd say, okay, Patty, you're going to do something, and you'd be noodling around an idea and say, well, walk me through the decision-making process. What's your plan? Or post, hey, I want to go back to what you did yesterday. Can you walk me through the decision-making process? And that gave it some stickiness. And so I sold that company in 2017. I have a company that does affordable living now across Canada and moving into the US. And so we pivoted the question. So now is it the right thing, not for the customer, but for the community? Because these are multi-res family apartments, and the right thing for the customer would be allow the customer to play their music loud, but not the right thing for the community. Right thing for our purpose and values of revolutionizing affordable communities. And are you willing to own the decision? So similar-ish, but we're still using the framework.
I like that. A lot.
Yeah, it's been helpful. So steal as you like. And so can you walk me through, I don't know, what did AmEx in regards to global business travel look like pre and post pandemic on workforce, and what strategies you guys have to continue and to engage folks?
Yeah, so clearly being in a corporate travel business, the pandemic was, devastating for us. So our revenues were cut by 95% immediately, just cut, right? So we have 14,000 people, no revenue. We're incredibly fortunate that a very strong balance sheet, but I mean, you're literally bleeding millions of dollars a month. So we did a couple of things, and I'm proud of how we came out of that. Again, the industry came to a halt. We took advantage of, fortunately, many countries like the US, Europe, Canada had programs. My office, or what became my home office, was like a war room of what are the programs in each different, country.
Oh, yeah.
But we had to do furloughs. We had those that were still with us on pay reductions. But we did a couple of things in order to maintain the engagement of our employees. We were very transparent on what was happening. We made sure that for people who were on a furlough, or in some cases actually severed, our commitment was we actually paid 100% of their health insurance, because from my perspective, you have a health, huge magnitude of a pandemic. We owe that, again, going back to your values. So we did that. And then we created this alumni network where we extended learning and development opportunities for anybody who's furloughed. We spent a lot of time and focus on mental health. So while people were out, you could learn a language, you could do whatever you wanted to do there. And we distilled, again, like there was central global principles, but the messages were distilled at the local country level. When we started to bring people back and did our employee engagement surveys, our employee engagement is actually up. So we have like above best in class engagement, and our retention's been good. And what people have told us was they were just so impressed and proud of like the level of respect we treated people with.
Wow. So you think, it was the respect, which is probably compassion, empathy, transparency, some of the things you talked about wrapped into a bow, and which drove respect and drove engagement. It sounds like that was
it's that and constant communication. So whether they were, and it was written, video messages from our CEO, from myself, local leaders.
Yeah, I feel like that's, no one ever gets in trouble for over communicating. It just doesn't happen. And sometimes you have this, I'm sure it's happened to you. It happens to me. You have this thought of, should I? And it's like, no, you should, as soon as you have that thought, right?
You absolutely should. And I think it's important too, to show your own, show a bit of your personal side too. So, and that's why I think it's important also that you're always communicating. So you're not all of a sudden the pandemic comes or something else, and you're the new face to people. I want to make sure that our colleagues are hearing from myself and from the rest of the senior leadership team on a very regular basis. So then you have like that you develop a level of trust. So it's so critical that when somebody looks at you, that they know, like, I can actually trust that person, or I know that there's actually action that's behind the words. Like we launched a program called Ask Me Anything. So our CEO will just, very simple, videotape, people just start sending in questions, and he'll answer anything. I mean, personal, it's actually a lot of fun. But
is that monthly, Patty, or quarterly?
He started it now. We're actually kicking it off. It's going to be probably about a monthly activity. It's fantastic. But I do think that connecting with people and building that trust is just so important. You can't wait for tough times and then show up. You got to show up consistently.
Well, a few things come to mind. One, I think that vulnerability equals bravery, and Holly Delaney, who was the chief people officer at Zappos, she since left and moved to a new role, but she was talking to me one time about when she's had to have these tough conversations during tough times of business. And one of the things that I really liked about her messaging was she said, when I do that, I start off by saying, and here's what I'm concerned about. Here's what's keeping me up. And here's what I think, here's what I'm worried about, so just to knowing, kind of to pull the elephant in the room, make that connection and say, I'm also human. It's not just leader versus employees. We're co-stakeholders.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's, and I have just found when you show that vulnerability and, not everybody has different styles. I'm very much an open book. The folks on my team hear about the highs and lows of being a working mom and everything else, but you just, that there are the days that, you're trying to do the carpool and run HR for a company, but it, you again, it just makes such a difference in the interpersonal relationships, and people will go the extra mile when they know that you will do the same for them.
Right. Yeah. It's that connection. It's trust. It's those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, look, Patty,
taking the time to know, it's taking the time to know what makes somebody tick. I mean, not everybody is as into as I said, I have a couple of kids. Anybody who's on my team, I make sure I know their children's names are, but that's not for everyone. Some people have, whether they have a passion, whether it's music or whatever their, sort of quote unquote thing is, that stuff matters. And to call people by their name. And when you're in the office, as we're starting to go back, to take the time to walk around, say hello. It might sound silly and just very obvious, but not everyone does it.
Well, it's funny. I wonder what's going to happen in this virtual environment, because building trust is, you have to be very intentional about it, very purposeful and strategic. It's not as easy as hey, how you doing today, Patty? How was your weekend? Yeah. It's, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And before we wrap, Patty, what else? Is there anything else in your mind that we haven't talked about that you think would be interesting or that you'd like to share in regards to people, culture, strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I mean, I think that it's coming out of hopefully coming out of the pandemic now. I do think that people are tired. I think the Zoom world, it's been great. Like we have, for example, in the US, close to 90% of our employees are virtual and always have been. So we run a very virtual workforce. But I do think after this period of time, that whole piece of personal connection, it's time to get people back together again.
I agree. And, I'll add to that. I saw, there's a gentleman by the name of John Love, who's I've had him on the podcast too, runs a very successful real estate company out of Canada. And he posted something and I reposted it. And it was about a video of a gentleman from the US. I can't remember who it was, but it's on my LinkedIn thread, who was saying about the problem with this virtual environment is the younger workforce will lack management and people managing skills because of this. And I had not thought about that.
Yes, how to look. I will tell you, the first time I went back, we reopened our office in New York and I commute down. Sometimes it's an adjustment, but I see that even with my own kids. If you want people to still know how to look somebody in the eye, how do I give them a handshake and not a fist bump? I mean, we'll do it, but just some basic social skills.
Right.
And it's just been a long time. And you do miss, I mean, I think a lot of that relationship stuff does happen in the hallway, in the elevator, but even in a virtual environment, it's being super deliberate on making sure you're not checking your email while you're having a conversation with somebody. Do you maybe show up in the meeting a few minutes early or start a few minutes late to actually chat with people? But there is something to be said of making sure that we don't lose that personal connection.
That's right. Because it sounds like it might probably going to, when I heard that and listened to the video, I thought, yeah, it's probably going to be a little more challenging to build corporate leadership skills, in this environment. For younger folks that haven't done it, right?
Together. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. It takes a lot of, I've always, I mean, I have direct reports all around the world. And I will tell you, it's easier to do it when you're all sitting in the same building. It takes a lot of effort and discipline to make sure you're kind of showing the love and making it a fun and engaging environment.
Absolutely. Well, Patty, look, it's been wonderful having you on. It's been great to get to know you. I'm going to keep you on I'm going to send you a beeper because when I get to Boston, I like the old pager stuff.
Absolutely.
And
I'm going to make my way to Halifax.
Please do. My home is mi casa es tu casa. Okay.
Thank you.
Did that make any sense? Do you speak Spanish? Maybe not.
It did.
Okay, good. So yes, please do put Halifax on your bucket list. And thanks so much. I really enjoyed the conversation, and let's keep in touch.
I did as well. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much. Take care.
For more information about Patty, please connect with her on LinkedIn. For more information about the Scaling Culture podcast or the Scaling Culture Masterclass, go to scalingculture.org. And if you're enjoying the Scaling Culture podcast, please subscribe and share. We'll be back next week with another incredible guest.